we're still quite a bit of ways away from the college football season actually kicking off and getting underway and talking about sports, talking about actual between the lines action in college football. And so I think one of the fun things to talk about leading up to the college football season is win total projections, right? Because Vegas knows their stuff. There is a reason there are skyscrapers in the middle of the desert. There's a reason why millions of people lose money every time they go to Vegas. It's because they know what they're doing. And there are win total projections right now for the Big Ten that I want to talk about, look at, go through. This is from the Action Network. These are their win totals that they have put up for the 2024 college football season. And Ohio State and Oregon are at 10.5 wins, the projection. Michigan, Penn State, 9.5. Iowa, Nebraska, USC, Washington at 7.5 apiece. Maryland at 7 flat. Rutgers, Wisconsin at 6.5. Illinois, Indiana, Northwestern, UCLA at 5.5. Minnesota at 5. Michigan State at 4.5. And Purdue at that same number. That's the projections. That's the over-under win total that you can place wagers on. And that's the numbers that Action Network has thrown out there that, like, hey, here's who we think is going to win this many games. So I am going to tell you what I think about those win projections. And I enjoy talking about this because when you look at it, it really is like, damn, you guys are good at this. Because I think in the now 18-team Big Ten, I think 10 of those totals are like the perfect number. The actual 100%, like, man, I don't know how in the hell I'm going to ever bet on that total because you guys are really good at this, and I don't have a great feel one way or another that the insert school here is going to win 7.5 games or whatever the case may be. But I do think there are a couple of spots where it's like, oh, that's not, no, sir, that number's too high, or the number is too low, that I think that team is going to win more games than what Vegas is giving them credit for. So this is a look at my projections. I think the total for Oregon at 10.5 is really high. And really, pretty much the only reason for thinking that is, one, you're going to play still a not great non-conference schedule, right? They're playing Idaho, Boise State, and at Oregon State. It's not great. It's not bad. It's kind of middle of the pack. But the Big Ten didn't necessarily do them a ton of favors. Their road games are at UCLA, which is not not a bad trip for them. And UCLA is, we'll talk about not being great. UCLA, at Purdue, at Michigan, at Wisconsin. At Michigan and at Wisconsin are difficult games, difficult places to play, especially then when you throw in a 2-hour or 3-hour time difference. It's not easy. But they also play Ohio State. Essentially, what this is asking is, are there two teams in the Big Ten that are going to beat Oregon in 2024? My immediate response to that is probably Oregon loses 2 conference games in 2024. I don't think that's outrageous to think. I don't think it's unreal to say, like, in the first year of a conference where you've got, or you're breaking in a new quarterback and you've got all these expanded travel times and things like that, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, hey, you're probably going to lose 2 games. Also, I think on the low end of the conference, UCLA, Minnesota, Purdue, what's the nice way to UCLA is going to be bad. And they've got to stretch They've got a stretch during their conference schedule. I guess not even during their conference schedule. They're at LSU, home for Oregon, at Penn State. That's right now the number 12, 3, and 8 teams in the country, and 2 of them are on the road. They also travel to Nebraska, to Washington. They play USC. It's not a great schedule for UCLA. To pretend as if 5.5 is an obtainable. When I look at their schedule, do I think they'll beat Hawaii to open the season? Yeah. Then they play Indiana. It's a tight one. I think they'll beat Minnesota. And that's 2.5. That's 2.5. And their number's 5.5. First-year head coach who got hired late. I don't know that is a great recipe for putting together a pretty high-quality season in your first year. Minnesota, I think, is another team that, okay, you have them at 5.5. The Action Network has them at 5.5. When you look at their schedule, their non-conference, again, isn't super difficult. They do play North Carolina on a Thursday night to open the season. At home, I might take the Tar Heels there. And then Rhode Island and Nevada, that's 2. But then who else in the Big Ten are they going to beat? At Illinois, at Rutgers, at UCLA. That only gets you to 5. And if the number's 5, I think, kind of saying in the similar vein, that Purdue is going to be terrible in 2024, in my estimation. When you look at their schedule, if you run down games 1 through 12, I'm confident that they'll win a game. Not an exaggeration. Confident that they will win 1 game. Purdue is listed at 4.5 on the total. They open the season against Indiana State, an FCS school who last year went 1-10. I feel confident that Purdue can beat Indiana State, but then their other non-conference games are Notre Dame at home, probably a loss. At Oregon State, probably a loss. Then their first 2 conference games are Nebraska at Wisconsin, not getting any better. At Illinois, Oregon. Maybe they can beat Illinois. Maybe they can beat Northwestern. Maybe they can beat Indiana. So if they win Indiana State, Illinois, Indiana, Northwestern, and they'd have to beat Michigan State, that's 4.5. It feels like a pretty high number. So I would hammer the unders on UCLA and Purdue. I don't see that there being a pathway for them to get to 5.5 and 4.5, let alone above that. Now, in the total feels too low. This one, like the one I feel most kind of passionate about is actually it's Nebraska. Nebraska has a 7.5 win total. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility if Nebraska starts the season 7-0. Like not exaggerating. I don't think it's ridiculous to project Nebraska to have a road game at Ohio State at the end of October where Nebraska is 7-0. They start the season with UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, all at home. It is not a great non-conference schedule. Now, Colorado, to start the season last year, was viewed as, kind of a big-time deal, and then they fell off at the end of the season. I would pick Nebraska to win that. So you're 3-0 out the chute. Is Nebraska better than Illinois? I think so. Is Nebraska better than Purdue? I think everybody in the Big Ten is better than Purdue. Rutgers, that's a pretty good game. But that's game number 6. You go into a bye week, and then you're at Indiana. I don't think it's ridiculous to say Nebraska is 7-0. I would project them to lose to Ohio State, but they're going to beat UCLA. Are they going to beat USC? It'll be a pretty good game. Then they finish with Wisconsin and Iowa. I think Nebraska's looking at a 9-3 at worst. They don't play Michigan. Don't play Penn State. Nebraska at 7.5 feels really, really, really low. I would say it's almost a foregone conclusion that they win 7 games. And that's without screwing up a different game. When you look at their schedule, their non-conference is at worst 2-1. At worst, they lose to Colorado. But then their conference are Illinois, Purdue, Indiana, UCLA. That's not a murderer's row by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a foregone conclusion that Nebraska wins at minimum 7 games, at minimum 8 games. I'm not going to tell you they're going to make the playoff or win the Big Ten or anything like that, but their schedule sets up nicely to win 8 games. And if they don't, yikes. But then when you look at, I'm bullish on Penn State, and this will probably burn me down the line. But 9.5 in 2024 for the Nittany Lions is essentially, who are they going to lose to in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State? And they get Ohio State at home. They have to go to USC, which is a difficult. We can dog on Lincoln Riley throughout the season, but I don't think that's I don't think that's a given L on Penn State. If you go through their schedule on paper, and I know they don't play the games on paper, that's a 10-2 record or an 11-1 record. I don't think Washington is going to be nearly as good as they were in 2023. Penn State is at West Virginia to start the season, then home for Bowling Green and Kent State. At worst, you're 2-1, probably 3-0. Then you start the Big Ten with Illinois, UCLA. 2 wins. At USC. Might be the toughest or second toughest game of the season. Bye week at Wisconsin. Then home for Ohio State. Home for Washington. At Purdue, at Minnesota, Maryland. For Penn State to not finish with 10 wins, they have to lose to 2 of West Virginia, Ohio State, Wisconsin, USC. They have to lose 2 of those 4 games, and I don't expect to see that happen. Now, again, it's just my take on it, but that feels really set up for Penn State to not only make the college football playoff, but be one of the higher seeds in the college football playoff, to essentially finish the season 11-1, and your 1 loss is to Ohio State. That's probably going to be a decent game. The idea that they're not going to get to 9.5 feels preposterous to me. So those are the 2 lows. I think the numbers that are just right, and it's the majority of the conference, but it feels like, damn it, Vegas, you know what you're doing. There's a reason that you are making billions of dollars every year. I think Ohio State at 10.5 is the right number. You could probably argue fits into the feels too low category, because essentially you have to predict that Ohio State loses to either Oregon or Penn State. Now, both are on the road. Buckeyes don't get really any help there. But are they going to lose 2 out of 3 to Oregon, Penn State, Michigan? I would say probably not. It feels unlikely that they're going to lose 2 of those 3. So Ohio State at 10.5. I put it in the numbers just right category, but it feels like it's probably just a little too low. You can't put 11.5, because then you're asking, okay, is Ohio State going to finish undefeated? Chances are no, probably not. Like, the chances that any of the 135 college football FBS teams finish undefeated are generally pretty low. So you're going to get a bunch of bets on the under. So I get that. But so that feels like the number's just right. Michigan, I think, is going to take a step backwards, like many would project. On Michigan's schedule, as we talk here on May 14th, they play 3 of the top 5 teams in the country in the preseason poll. They play 3 of the 5 best teams in America, the way it sits right now. Now they get 2 of them at home with Oregon and Texas. They have to go to the Horseshoe, but they've won 3 in a row against Ohio State. Also, they play USC, and they have a rivalry game with Michigan State that, despite me not being super bullish on the Spartans, I don't think you can just throw out the record books there. So, 9.5 for Michigan. You play 3 of the top 5 teams in the country, according to the preseason poll. Is it outrageous to say Michigan goes 9-3? No, I don't think so. Not only do you play 3 of the top 5 teams in America, you play the team you played in the national championship a season ago, plus USC. So for all of the, Penn State's conference schedule stinks. Penn State's Big Ten schedule is bad, and they are a huge beneficiary of it. Michigan's pretty much the exact opposite. They get USC, Washington, Michigan State, Oregon, and Ohio State. Didn't get any favors. Also, I think USC is right at that number, and so is Maryland. I went through Maryland's schedule, and if I was to just, and obviously we're not going to agree on every single game, right? But if you go through Maryland's schedule, they are listed at 7. Their non-conference is UConn, Virginia, Villanova. I feel like that's 3. Can they beat Michigan State? Yeah, that's 4. Indiana, 5. So that's a 5-0 start for Maryland. Northwestern, yeah, I think they could win that game. I think they're probably favored to win that game. Can they beat Rutgers? Yeah. Can they beat Minnesota? Yeah, I think so. So Maryland was kind of right at that number of 7. And so I think that's probably a pretty good number, because are they going to lose to somebody they shouldn't? Yeah, but are they going to beat somebody they probably shouldn't too? I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the season Maryland gets Penn State. That wouldn't floor me by any stretch of the imagination. Or could they beat Iowa at home? Yeah, I think so. So there's some wiggle room there, but I think Maryland is right at that perfect number. Also, I never get a great feel of what Northwestern is. It's always really difficult at the times you think Northwestern is going to be like a 2-10 team. They end up being an 8-5 or whatever. I never know. I never have any idea what to put Northwestern. So for me, automatically, like last year, I would have probably picked Northwestern to say, hey, instead of being 8-5, you would have thought that maybe they're going to finish 2-10. And that's with the help of playing Howard and Duke and UTEP and Purdue and Illinois. They go 8-5. And the games that they lost by 3 to Iowa in Wrigley Field. They lost by 8 on the road at Nebraska. They're not all that far away from being certifiably not bad last year. Now, that always ends up feeling like those are the times that Northwestern then comes crashing back down to earth. But I don't know. I don't know what they are. So I'll give them 5. I think that 5.5 is a great number. I think USC, Iowa, and Washington all being at 7.5. They feel like coming into the season, before you get too deep into the weeds, that feels like that's right about where I would pick them to finish, is when you look at the overall conference. Are Nebraska, USC, Washington, Maryland, Iowa all kind of in that same pack? Yeah, I think so. But again, I think Oregon's a bit too high. I think Michigan's probably just a bit too high, and Nebraska's a bit too low. But that's where I would put those schools, just on gut feeling, in the middle of May. And we got plenty of time to talk about this and sort this out, and plenty of time for things to change too. You can get injuries, you can get guys, you can have battles that are won, or coaches that end up moving, assistant coaches, coordinators. All these things can change, and you get bad injuries. You can have academic ineligibilities and all of those stupid things that can come up that can affect a lot of things. But as it sits on May 14th, that's the way I look at the Big Ten, and that's how I think about the over-under win total projections before we get to kickoff in August. So that's my thoughts on it. Want to know what your thoughts. Who do you think's got a number too high or too low? Let us know in the comments down below. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you are doing so. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we're pumping out. And if you're listening on a podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll catch you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.